No Clive Barker, no Hellraiser. A common battle cry and something you will see strewn all over the internet anywhere where anyone is discussing anything Hellraiser and the possibility of reboots and remakes. In today's video I want to discuss my personal thoughts on the Scarlet Gospels, the sequel to the novella The Hellbound Heart that is the direct source material Clive Barker used for the film Hellraiser that he wrote and directed. I will discuss how the Scarlet Gospels is a direct reflection of Clive Barker's personal thoughts on the Hellraiser franchise and how that is a direct example of why I believe it's very apparent that Clive Barker himself has no interest in returning to the world he created, along with discussing the two types of Hellraiser fandom and how the Scarlet Gospels exposes which part of the fandom you lie in with respect to Hellraiser. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to leave a like and share this across your social media platforms. YouTube is currently suppressing my channel and it really helps your favourite creators if you would share their content. Also, a sub would be absolutely amazing, and make sure you tell YouTube that you want to be notified of future content by pressing the bell icon and selecting Notify All. That out of the way, let's dive right in. A common question I have received over the years of being on YouTube and delving into the Hellraiser mythos has always been, what is my take on the Scarlet Gospels? And it's a question I haven't exactly shied away from answering, though it's a question I didn't want to answer without giving it the proper context and time. Now this video and the statement of no Clive Barker, no Hellraiser allows me to do that. There will be no mincing of words here, and fans of the channel, I suspect you would expect no less from me. To fully understand my thoughts on the Scarlet Gospels, I want to outline my thoughts on Hellraiser and Clive Barker as a whole, to give context to my genuine and very sincere respect of Clive, the world he has created and the legacy of horror he has inspired. I absolutely love the property. Hellraiser is, in my eyes, a genuine masterpiece, only bettered by Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. Now both movies go together perfectly. Clive Barker, a fellow Brit, infused his love for S&M into high horror and gave us something that at the time was far ahead of the curve and still is to this day. When Hellraiser was released, it broke the mould from silent hunter-killer slashers or laughing quip machines. Now I personally don't have anything against those, but there is something so sweet and delightfully horrific to have a murderous monk of hell so eloquently well spoken. The Hellraiser property from there obviously became a franchise in its own right, spawning many sequels, comic books, and expanded media. Unfortunately, as it did this, Clive Barker's grip on the property slipped, and with his grip slipping, his resentment grew. We have to remember that Clive Barker wrote and directed the Hellraiser movie we all love. It was firmly and completely his vision, based off his own novella. So when we start to discuss the Scarlet Gospels, keeping this in mind is important. A common complaint about the more recent Hellraiser movies is the appearance of Judeo-Christian references and out-and-out statements of heaven and hell, whereas in the original two movies, it was dimensions, explorers, and ambiguity was left over the domain of the Cenobites. Now right now, readers of the Scarlet Gospels will be crying out, Mr. H, Clive Barker has referenced heaven and hell, what are you talking about? Calm down, I'm getting to that. The Scarlet Gospels takes elements from the Hellraiser franchise, specific elements that fans love, such as the name Pinhead, and rather than embracing them, butchers them, spits on them, and destroys them. Clive Barker resents what Hellraiser became as he lost his grip on it. His resentment grew, and one of the very notable points of contention was the name Pinhead. Clive Barker always hated that. But rather than acknowledging that the name had become iconic and loved amongst the fans, sealing the demonic force as a horror legend for all eternity, he chose to not so subtly show his disdain for it in the Scarlet Gospels. Anyone who dare call the Hell Priest Pinhead gets destroyed mercilessly, violently and bloody. This is how Clive Barker views the fans of the franchise without his management. Now, I genuinely don't mind the Scarlet Gospels. It's an interesting read with interesting elements, but it is without a doubt anything but Hellraiser. Again, it's important to note the distinction between the Hellbound heart and Hellraiser, the movie that Clive Barker created. Now, Pinhead goes on a hunt for magical items, destroys Hell's leadership, yes, the very literal Judeo-Christian Hell, and goes on a hunt for Satan. Yes, the very literal Satan. Satan sat in his armour, locked away, as he couldn't come to terms with being without God. Yes, the very literal Christian God kills himself. And Pinhead takes his armour. Satan wakes up and kills Pinhead. Now, is that an interesting story thread? Absolutely. But does it scream Hellraiser to you? No. So as you can see, although an interesting book with interesting ideas, it's very much a direct reflection of Clive Barker and how he views the property that would grow without his management, as he had signed away his rights for money. A fair exchange, but I don't blame him. He is protective and perhaps he regrets his decision. However, it's a decision he should come to terms with, and rather than writing what is essentially fan fiction in his own universe to butcher the property, he should have embraced it, built it, grown off it, and also profited from it. The fandom part of this discussion is interesting, as I'm sure a lot of people watching this will be shocked by the statements made and the story threads in the Scarlet Gospels. Those same people shocked will be the ones who instantly disliked this video the moment I said perhaps Clive Barker shouldn't return to the franchise. And they are the same people who, ironically, haven't read the Scarlet Gospels and scream, "No Clive Barker, no Hellraiser." You see, the fandom is split. And yes, I acknowledge there are outliers to this, but generally speaking, there are two sectors of fandom. There are those fans of Clive Barker, whose only exposure to his work is the movie, or movies. And then there are the fans of the property, who have consumed the media across most of its forms, including the books and the comics. Now, the fans of the property generally acknowledge, having read the Scarlet Gospels, that Clive Barker was somewhat off base in his follow-up book. They near universally agree that some of the elements were bizarrely inserted, and most can acknowledge that Clive Barker clearly shows disdain and resentment for Hellraiser as a property, and not the Hellbound Heart as a novella. But the battle cries of "No Clive Barker, no Hellraiser" near always come from those that have only seen the movies, believing that Clive Barker to be some messiah of horror, and although he is incredible and has my utmost respect for what he has created initially, it's very apparent that Clive Barker does not like the Hellraiser that those fans love. There is no Hellraiser under Clive Barker. He doesn't want to return to it, and if he did, he would butcher the things those people love that are crying out for his return. It's a sad state of affairs. It's a what-if scenario. If Hellraiser hadn't been sold and crossed to various parties to have their hands in it, would Clive Barker show the resentment he holds for what he created? I believe he absolutely would not. If that hadn't happened, then yes, I believe the statement "No Clive Barker, no Hellraiser" would stand true. As it stands though, with the rights being sold, the franchise growing outside and away from Clive, no Hellraiser with Clive Barker is perhaps the more apt statement. So what are my personal thoughts on Scarlet Gospels? It's an interesting story, it's interesting threads, and it's well put together, showing great creativity and imagination. However, it's a story that appears more like fan fiction than it should, being that it is from the creator of the Hellraiser property, and it's a story that goes out of its way to butcher what the fans of the movies love, and sadly in a very heavy-handed and gratuitous fashion. It's a sad position to be in, as those fans that cry "No Clive Barker, no Hellraiser" are the same fans that Clive Barker shows a distinct lack of respect for in his motives behind writing the Scarlet Gospels. I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing what is put to screen over the next few years, and hopefully it will respect and pay homage to the Clive that wrote the original movie and not what Clive has become.